Hi, everybody. I am really excited to be back hosting another episode of Groundwork TV. We've got a really important conversation ahead of us. You'll be seeing me a bit over the course of the next stretch as we dive into a government shutdown. Hopefully it ends sometime soon, but don't hold your breath. But we're trying to talk about how local communities across the country are dealing with it and how they're impacted by it. So, as you know, I'm Joe, founder of Groundwork Project, and I'm here with Dana from ReImagine Appalachia, who happens to be a member of Groundwork's National Advisory Board. So, Dana, I want to just pass it over to you before we get into the shutdown. Give us a quick little background on yourself, what you do, and a little bit about ReImagine Appalachia for folks that aren't as familiar with it as the rest of us.
Great. So I'm Dana Kuhnline. I'm the program director for ReImagine Appalachia. We're a 4-state coalition, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, but we often refer with Virginia and Tennessee too. We love them down there. But the group was founded in 2020 with the idea that the way our economy works isn't working for most people. And so we are a coalition that promotes a shared vision of what a modern economy could be, how we can approach the big crises of our time, including climate change, in a way that gives workers and communities a seat at the table, so that new development and the thinking about how we create wealth in Appalachia, that we can change those paradigms and really, when we are looking at new projects, how can we do those in a way that is actually good for workers and the community? One thing I say a lot is that Appalachia is one of the wealthiest places in the world. It's created a huge amount of wealth. We're just not good at keeping it, right? And so much.
Unpack that for me for a second, though. I mean,
yeah.
But like,
yeah. So we have
but like, tell me more.
We have those billion-dollar coal fields. We have the natural gas industry. We have the timber industry. And so much of the steel industry was started in the area, the foundation of manufacturing in Pittsburgh and the mills and other cities in Appalachia, Wheeling, were huge core pieces of modern steel. And of course, the coal in the area is how you make steel. And so that was this big advantage we had into the developing steel industry. And so at one point, there was a little town in West Virginia that had the highest concentration of millionaires in the world. The money didn't stay. The money left the region, and the wealth left the region, and the well-being left the region. And so how can we think about economic development in a way that it stays, that it actually benefits people who live there? Right. Not extracted. Right. Yeah, we're building it up from the bottom. And so, we look at every issue with that lens. And one of our big principles is also that the federal government can do good things for our communities, and that we need those investments to get to the next stage of our economic development. And they're really needed now. They're needed as we respond to the climate crisis, as we respond to the crisis of all of these jobs leaving the area with the downturn of the coal industry, and a lot of the industrialization that's happened. So we're just at a real moment.
So if that's the case, walk me through this, because, not to make it political, but I think just to inform, right? Those 4 states you mentioned, 4 of them voted for Donald Trump. 3 of them, I think, pretty handily, right? Pennsylvania was a bit of a toss-up, but the rest of them pretty handily voted for Donald Trump. Now, Republicans are in charge of the House and the presidency. They need some Democratic votes to kind of keep government funded. Things shut down. How are people hearing about the shutdown, feeling about the shutdown? Like, what's your interpretation of what the consequences of this are going to be for the communities that you care about and that you're working in?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reactions to the shutdown is exhaustion. I was just seeing earlier that I have been surprised at the lack of kind of buzz around it. They're like, it's sort of like, here's a thing, which is honestly, I mean, it's such a shame, because it's a huge political moment. It's a mark of the level of crisis that we're in, and yet I think we're working under such a stage of constant sprint and constant barrage of information that's difficult to process. I think one thing that gets lost is that the core reason for the shutdown right now is about healthcare So whether or not those 22 million people lose their COVID era enhanced subsidies, if they're on Obamacare, get their health care through healthcare.gov. And so if those
hold on.
end,
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you. Forgive me, because what I unfortunately, like, I've followed a bunch of government social media accounts when I was in government. They're still on there probably because they don't know how to unfollow them. But like Donald Trump says, this is about healthcare because Democrats are providing healthcare to, his word, illegals, undocumented immigrants. I think you have a different perspective on that. But like, if it's about healthcare, what aspect about healthcare is this about from your perspective?
Yeah, it is. It's about rural healthcare. It's about rural hospitals, which are operating at the end of the day.
Right, that part's not true. Right, it's not about healthcare. It's not about providing healthcare to undocumented immigrants, which is what Donald Trump says. It's about
correct.
Right. So what's it about?
I mean, it's about everybody. I mean, it's millions of people, and so one, our rural healthcare systems are already operating over budget. There's a lack of accessible healthcare in rural areas in Appalachia, and those hospitals are totally dependent on these subsidies and on people having access to care. And so if their prices go up, then they lose that healthcare. Those hospitals are under increased strain. And so to me, it's about low and middle income families. And that's every type of family that is low and middle income. It doesn't matter, what color your skin is or where you were born. If your income is in that bracket, your healthcare is probably a huge percentage of your budget, and it's about to go up if they don't make this change. And so it's incredibly impactful for folks' just day-to-day lives.
And up a lot. And at this conversation with somebody else recently, one of the challenging things about healthcare is, one, it's super complicated, right? So people don't give it a whole lot of thought, and then you don't really think about it until you're sick, and in which case, like, it becomes the most important thing. It's like, got to go to the doctor, you got a sick spouse or kid or parent, whatever else. If costs go up by factors 2, 3, 4 X, right? So you're paying $1,000 a month, you're going to be paying $5,000 a month for some of these families, right? Like it's going to go up a lot, and so it becomes unaffordable. So if you're healthy, rather than spending $2,000 or $3,000 a month to insure your family, what are you going to do? You don't pay for it. So now you go uninsured. So there's a risk there, obviously, if you do get sick, somebody gets a car accident, whatever else, you don't have health insurance. But what also happens from a population standpoint is healthy people no longer pay for the insurance. So what happens? Sick people who need it stay in it. But then what happens? Those costs go skyrocketing. And the entire thing is built around this idea of, healthcare is one of those systems that, like, again, you don't really think about it or need it very much until you do, but we're all going to need it. Whether it's you, your spouse, your kid, somebody gets sick, your parent gets sick, we're going to draw on it. And so we might as well put these systems in place to lower those costs, increase that access, so that you actually, if you don't need an emergency room, you don't go to an emergency room. You can get it someplace else. But that means you need to invest in it, which is the entire architecture here that you're just said is going to be gutted by what they're doing, intentionally so.
Yeah, no, it's on purpose, and everyone's going to find out about it when they log on to healthcare.gov in December and they go to renew their same policy, and it's skyrocketed in price. But then by then it'll be too late. And so that's why now is the moment for the shutdown. And I think that gets lost. Like, why? That's one of the questions I answer for folks. Why now? Because we've been under attack from the government for 9 months. And so I think folks have a lot of reasons in the current context to be unhappy with how the federal government is operating right now. But why this moment? Why this shutdown now? And one of those central issues is that healthcare. There's a lot else going on. Yeah.
Unpack that a little bit for me, because as we talked about a second ago, like, these are states that voted for Trump. These are states that largely support him and some of what he's doing, right? Like, he's still popular in these places. When you're hearing from folks, do they make this connection with, hey, what's really at stake here is your ability to gain access to healthcare, and by the way, by extension, the solvency of that rural hospital, right? Like, these things don't exist, like the hospital closes. And then, by the way, that's the driver of, like, an economy. So, like, are they making that connection, or do you have to explain it to them? Do they trust you when you tell it, or are they like, no, there's no way you let that happen? Because this was like something that would happen in government all the time. When we were there, we were like, hey, they're coming after your Medicare. And like, there's no way they would do it. I'm like, well, here's what he said. They just don't believe it.
Right.
So, walk me through it.
I mean, a couple things. One thing I always say is that I've never voted for somebody that I agreed with 100%. And another thing I say a lot, and so I think a lot of folks voted for Trump or whoever else they voted for one reason, and you always have the list of stuff that you're willing to be okay with and the list of stuff you actually like. And so I don't, and I always say you ask 10 people their political opinion in Appalachia and you'll get 15 opinions. It's complicated, it's never just one thing. I think a lot of people understand the importance of healthcare to the local economy because it really is just one of the highest employers in the region. And so everybody knows someone who's a nurse or works in the hospital or in other ways is part of that engine that, keeps healthcare moving for people in rural communities and has a lot of pride, and the folks they know who are working in the healthcare industry. So I think folks do really understand the importance of healthcare as an industry. It is not, when you think of it as sort of a person who's living their life and the tens of thousands of things they're juggling, it is true that a lot of people are not really dialed in to the economic structure of hospitals. And because why would they be? That's not very interesting unless you are a hospital administrator. And so that could be a little bit of something to explain the way that, A connects all the way to Z. And so, and those things happen slowly. So folks are going to open their inboxes in December. They're going to see their healthcare.gov rates have gone up, but it's not like that is going to flip a switch and close the hospital. And so when things do move at this, regional level, they move for a lot of factors. And so the direct correlation from A to B or A to L is really what we're looking at. That could be a complicated thing to explain. And I think, but when you bring it back to that monthly payment, what's coming out of your paycheck every month to go towards healthcare costs, which is always more than anybody wants. And we also look at rising electricity rates. A lot of the Trump administration's actions are leading to, and that is a real, kitchen table issue. Another thing we look at that is a real kitchen table issue is disaster relief. So we're a year out from Hurricane Helene, which was an incredibly devastating hurricane. That could happen again. What if that happens during this shutdown? That's something that I've really been afraid about, to be honest. Every time it rains, I'm like, oh God. You're watching the weather reports. Because right now the National Weather Service and NOAA, which does a lot of weather monitoring, and FEMA, they're all working under capacity. So we have lowered capacity to track storms, to track localized weather events, and lowered capacity for disaster relief overall because of these changes that have happened over the last year. And now when we look at the shutdown, it's even lower because you have all these folks on furlough.
Do people draw that connection? I mean, look, I'm in Massachusetts, and we've got fishing's a significant industry here, right?
Yeah.
Really, and it's not economically, but Boston it's got a big harbor, and there's both going in and out of it. So people also understand that from time to time we get a hurricane or big storm, you need the forecasting there is important, right? Parts of Appalachia aren't known for, West Virginia is not necessarily known for tornadoes, and hurricanes don't normally hit places like that quite as hard, right? Helene hit some other parts further south, but do they make that connection? And obviously no place is immune from natural disaster, but are they making that connection with one, kind of the immediate on weather, but two, also the connection with climate, or is that too tangential? How do you approach that?
Yes. Flooding is such a problem in the region right now. And there's so many places that are getting flooded worse than they've ever been. And where the water is coming is out of the floodplain. So back in July, there was a major flood in Wheeling, West Virginia. And there are low-lying parts of Wheeling that are on the river, and they always flood. And people know what to do when the flood comes because they've done it a million times. It rains a lot, you're going to pack up and go to grandma's house or whatever. There's a system. where the water hit was places that had never flooded before in that area. And we saw the same in Whitesburg, Kentucky a couple of years ago. We've seen it again and again. And what we also see is that places that have never been flooded before, they're getting hit with repeated floods. And then the next flood is worse because the natural infrastructure and the local infrastructure hasn't had time to recover from the last flood because the recovery is so underfunded. And so we have so many communities that are clamoring for information on how they can DIY their own disaster resiliency programs because the federal government just hasn't been there because all these programs just got canceled by the Trump administration. And so there was a lot of really ambitious projects that we worked really hard to get passed as around disaster resiliency in the region, but that have been canceled. But the short answer is yes. Increased flooding is a huge topic of conversation and a huge source of fear in the region, to be honest, because it's really steep slopes, and for historical reasons, people live along the water, and a lot of times they don't even have access to the tops of the mountains because those are still owned by the coal companies, and they won't let people build houses there. And so they're all on the water, which is a beautiful place to live until it rains. And so it's incredibly vulnerable to water. Yeah.
So are people tracking this when you talk, like, is it something that is coming up in conversation? Because, I'll be honest, walking down the street in Massachusetts, right? It's now week 2 of the shutdown. For most folks, it isn't hitting yet, right? Like they're going about their business. It's not like a major thing. I went to the airport on Friday and it wasn't, it was fine. Are people making these connections, or is it been sophisticated enough in their implementation of it that they haven't quite felt the pain yet?
As far as the shutdown?
Yeah.
I think unless you're a government employee, you're not feeling it yet. I know in West Virginia, they're using some state money to keep the national parks open. And some other facilities, and Social Security payments are still going out. A lot of those other things, they're automated, or they're the IRS, they have their budgets still going. And so a lot of those day-to-day things that when you think about it, how many places in your day-to-day life intersect with the federal government in the 24-hour period? Not everything. I think as it gets farther out, the last shutdown we had in 2018, 2019 was 35 days. And that's when you really start to see you go through more than one pay period. It's that 2-week pay period is where the pain point really starts to shut things down. I think if we have a major hurricane or a major storm that happens in there, that's sort of an extreme example. But if everything can stay smooth, it'd be that 2-week point where it starts to.
I remember when I was in government, we were, it mattered whether you got paid on the 1st of the month, the 30th of the month, right?
Yep.
A lot of folks get paid once a month, and so you could actually go off as long as it didn't cross that pay period.
Yep.
You didn't really feel it much. It's when you did cross that pay period where folks were used to being at, you're paying your mortgage, you're paying a credit card bill, you're paying your rent, you're paying something else, and all of a sudden you don't have it. That pay period ends up being that big pressure inflection point. I remember I was in office in that 35-day shutdown, and remember volunteering in a soup kitchen and feeding members of the Department of Justice and others who were coming in for meals because it had gone on for, well over a pay period. And, if you get a free meal here, you have money to pay this bill over there, right? But it was just stunning where you're sitting there going like, hey, these are.
Well, I mean, how many people have more than 30 days set aside in their budget? So you hit
$400, right?
And you're living from paycheck to paycheck, which is incredibly common. Yeah. And you're 5 days past that paycheck. You pay what has to be paid. You pay the mortgage if you got the money, and then everything else will keep. So that's really where we are. And then I think the other thing is just that federal employees have been treated so incredibly poorly over the last year. I just said the other day, and their they're all being threatened with the mass firings. And one thing, that I guess threatening to fire people is a negotiation tactic, but to me, the negotiation equivalent is killing the hostages. That is a choice that you are making because you want to. That is not something that's necessary. You're just doing that to be cruel because you're interested in that tactic. There's absolutely no reason. The other thing they just did was they canceled over 300 Department of Energy grants that would have gone towards energy efficiency and clean energy and lowering energy prices. And the only reason to cancel those grants is because they wanted to, because they want to, I guess, raise energy prices for people. I don't know why. So yeah, I think it's a really difficult time, especially for those federal employees in those federal programs. And,
I want to be respectful of your time, but
yes,
super important conversation. Any last messages that you want folks here to know about how this is impacting the communities that you work in and the places you care about so much?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, the longer it goes on, the greater the financial harm to American families. But if we don't push back against the harms that we're seeing, we're also going to see harms to an American family. So I do feel like we're in an incredibly difficult situation. But I do think it's important to push back against all the measures we're seeing from the administration and the impacts that they're having on folks in Appalachia, on the attempts that folks are making to build a bigger, better, brighter future for the region. There's so many folks who they just want to dig in and do the work. And right now it's like you're working on a trampoline. You just can't, nothing's stable from 1 minute to the next. And so having all these disruptive things happening when you have such big goals, such an important vision, it's a shame to see all that hard work that folks are doing at the local level being undermined just to play a political game at the national level. So,
conversation topic for another day. The central question our country asks itself is, what do we owe each other? Like, what is the cost of community, the cost of being a nation, responsibilities that one person that calls this country home owes another. We ask that in our Declaration of Independence. It's kind of part of those questions, and they're questions, right? There's never an answer to them, and those get redefined from time to time. Part of what you're talking about is, to what extent can we care for each other, right? And what commitment are we willing to make to each other? And this administration has one perspective on that, and you're voicing a different one. It's out there. It's up to us to go out there and make that case, and you make it beautifully, Dana. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Thanks for hosting this, and it's great having the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was under better circumstances.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.